Hi everyone, in today's video we're going to have a look at sustainability and environmental concerns and how it relates to the A-level um, written exams. So first of all, it's more likely to come up in paper 2 because that's more to do around the theory of design and why we do the things we do. You may get smaller questions in paper 1. So paper 1 is mainly about materials, properties, manufacturing processes, how things we made, those sorts of things. So you may get, for example, of like a part A may be giving you an example of a product and asking you to name suitable material. Part B might then be asking you about how it might be manufactured. Then part C might be, for example, any issues you may need to consider around the environment with that specific material. Whereas paper 2, you're probably going to look at like an 8 or 10, 12 mark question where you need to come up with wider issues that need to be considered by manufacturers or designers. So in terms of what you actually need to know for the topic, so what these 6 R's are, now if you've done product design or DT generally at GCSE or geography, those will be terms you'll have heard of before. You need to understand the different labelling that can appear on products and specific materials, what the term carbon footprint means, and then be able to give some real life examples of it. And then also just generally, we need to be able to give real life examples, of things companies are doing to lessen their environmental impact that they're actually physically having. So why do we actually need to? Why is this in the exam? Why does it actually matter? So obviously, at the minute, as a world, we are very dependent on our finite resources, which are coal, oil, and gases. Okay. Now, obviously, finite. So there's only so much of those resources left, and it's very likely that they will run out in our lifetime. Even things like timber. So obviously, it's sustainable because you can regrow it. But even like the fastest you can grow a normal tree really is like 10 years, give or take. So it's not like you can just plant a seed, put water in it, then the next day you've got a full tree. So it takes planning to be able to do. On top of that, using like extracting all these raw materials, so extracting metal ores, extracting oil, extracting gas from the earth to then refine into material, creates a huge amount of CO2 emissions, which is linked to things like global warming. And then obviously global warming then has a knock-on effect on things like weather patterns, on animal habitats, all the own crop growing, all these sorts of things. So this is why there's such a big push nowadays. You see a lot more companies are doing a lot more to show that they're reducing their environmental impact. So we'll start off with recycling and the 6 R's. So recycling actually is quite a broad term. So there's actually sort of 3 levels to recycling. So you've got primary recycling, which is where the product you're finished with it, but it still functions perfectly well, and you just give it away or sell it, and it becomes secondhand. Typically, things like charity shops reselling things on eBay, Gumtree. You see a lot of adverts on TV now for apps like Vinted, where you like take pictures and then you sell it quite quickly like that. Things like Facebook Marketplace. That does also link exactly the same with like reuse as part of the 6 R's. Next, you've got secondary recycling. So this is when at the end of a product's life, the thing is then used for something else. So the most common one for you in the home probably is going to be things like jam jars or coffee jars, and then using them to put like plants in them or storing pencils in them or using it for something else. There are also um, some shops like Waitrose where you bring your own container to fill it up with like cereals and coffees and those sorts of things as well. Then you got tertiary recycling. So this is when things are completely broken down chemically, bleached, and then like turned into something completely different. So like plastic bottles, for example, being shredded and spun into fibers to make clothing. So that's recycling. So now we're going to have a look at the 6 R's. Now originally there were three: reduce, reuse, recycle. Then they actually started to think actually we can break that down a little bit more. With the 6 R's, I'm going to give you some examples of how they apply as we go through. That's the key thing you've really got to remember is making sure you can apply it to a real situation in industry or in the world anyway. So we'll start with reduce. So this is the idea of trying to encourage people to cut down on the amount of materials and energy used to make a product, package a product, and to use a product really. Um, so this could be as simple as just reducing the amount of packaging you actually use. I know many people It's like when you buy things from Amazon and the thing that you buy comes in a box that's 10 times bigger than the actual thing that you need. That's a huge amount of waste. So there's actually trying to get everyone to, or get certain companies to reduce the amount they're actually wasting. Um, on a smaller scale, you have food packaging and things like that, where they're trying to reduce the amount of packaging they actually use as well, or using like thinner material, so like plastic bottles, maybe doing like a thinner amount of plastic on it, which on one bottle doesn't really make a big difference, but if you're making like 1,000 a day and you're reducing the bottle by 20% thickness, like over time that will add up quite a lot. Then you got reuse. So we talked about that being the secondary or the primary recycling of like just reusing for something else. So that is things like single-use plastic, like drinks bottles. So the idea that really you don't want to do that. Really, you should have your own drinks bottle. You fill it up. Same with like coffees. If people go to like Starbucks, rather than just getting the disposable cups, buy like you can buy like nice coffee mugs that you can just reuse over and over again and travel with that way. So recycle is the main one that most people think about. Um, Obviously, because we know there's finite resources, there is a big push now to make products with things that can be taken apart and reused again. Now, particularly with A level, there's a very big push on making sure you understand the term of disassembly and how products can be actually taken apart to be recycled. So you see the example at the bottom of the screen with like the watch. That same works the same for things like electronics, like with cars, and all sorts of things that really companies now should be making it so things are a lot easier to break down, separate, and then they can be recycled that way, because it comes down to ease. Because if you don't make it simple to do, people won't do it and then it'll just get chucked away. And then repair. So on top of making things easy to be disassembled, companies now they will be coming into law in the summer of 2021. Uh, a law where companies now must make it so things can be repaired easily. So it kind of works along with like disassembly. It means that people can take things apart and it's easier to find replacement parts. It's easy to install the replacement parts. You don't require any specialist equipment. Um, Trying to get away from that whole throwaway culture, particularly with people like Apple, who tend to make things that you can't physically take away because they integrate it into the casing, so you actually physically can't take certain parts out of the electronics, so you've got no choice but to just buy a new one. But when that becomes law, they will start dishing out fines, and I imagine you will probably start to see companies will start to move away from that and trying to make sure that things can be repaired a lot better. So refuse and rethink. These ones are a little bit more ambiguous and sort of like how do you really pinpoint and give examples? Because refuse is really down to like the consumer's attitude to consumption, really. So before lockdown, if you were to go shopping, it's sort of like that impulse buying of buying things because you see it, not because you actually physically need it. Because obviously, normally when you go to the shop, you got in mind, right, I need to buy X, Y, and Z. But then you go, oh, look at this, and you buy it, and then sometimes it just stays in the house, you don't use it, and then you chuck it, and it's just been wasted. So it's like, do you really need that product? Then there's also the idea of refusing, like, has it been made ethically? If you've got two products, one has been made in an ethical way or it's locally sourced and one hasn't been, are you going to make the choice to go with the more ethically sourced one? Yes, it might be more expensive, but it was made it's more conscious when it was made than the other one. Um, and we talked about it before as well, with like reuse things, like not use it's like refusing to use single-use plastic bottles and you using like refills instead of that. And then rethink that really is more down to say the manufacturing side of things, and say a company is making a product. After a couple of years, there may well be a more efficient way of making the same product. So do they spend the money to buy the new equipment to make it in a better way, or find a cheaper way of doing it, or finding some way that, like changing the materials or whatever it may be, trying to think of a different way of doing the same thing, but uh, consuming less energy while doing it. And again, at the bottom, you can see there's more examples of making sure products can be disassembled quite easily for recycling, which is a packet of floss. So in terms of the exam, so we said it's normally going to be on paper too. So what kind of questions can come up? Typically what they'll do, so this might be like an 8 or a 10 mark question, and they'll give you like an everyday product that you've seen. TV remotes are always a popular one. Kettles are also quite popular as well. And they might say, for example, for the given product, explain how manufacturers or designers may look to reduce the environmental impact of given product or something along those lines. And there are some generic answers you can give. Some will be more specific to if it's, say, like a kettle because it's electronic compared to something else. But there are some generic ones you can get. So things like making the walls of the product thinner, so it's using less plastic, so it's not as bulky, making it generally smaller anyway, only having like essential buttons. So like on your TV remote, really, how many of the buttons do you actually press? Probably like 4. How many buttons are there? Like 20 or more. Uh, Using renewable energy when you're manufacturing it. So are the company that they're making it, are they using like hydropower, solar power, or are they just still like coal and oil? Making it easier to be disassembled. Again, disassembly, you're going to hear it quite a few times in this video. That's like one of those buzzwords that the exams are really like after because companies are having a big push on making things so they can be disassembled easier. Reusing the electronic components for another purpose. Again, because you can disassemble it, you can then take some of the components and use them for another product down the road. Using recycled material. Molding the recycling code, so you'll see the codes uh, in the next couple of slides. And if you've looked at the plastics video as well, and you see like the recycling, like the scale of 1 to 7, telling you the codes for each material, having those molded into the actual casing, so you know whether how easy it is to recycle, and then again making it easier to repair, which once again links back to disassembly and making sure that parts are available. There's no point making it just easy to disassemble if the parts that you need for it are very, very difficult to get. So you want to make sure that the parts are easy to buy so that it encourages people to repair them. So environmental legislation and regulations. So these are things where you just need to know the fact. You don't necessarily need to know when it came into effect, but you need to know what it is and what it covers. Okay, it can be a little bit tricky at A level because they don't necessarily give you any hints in the question. It may just say what legislation relates to electronic products, for example, and then you'd need to know. You need to be able to name those legislations and then what it covers. So the first one is eco labeling. So you can see the logo on the left hand side, the European uh, logo, and then the stars around it. So this is a voluntary scheme. So it came in 1993. So basically, this is um, voluntary, and it shows that the company has the least negative effect on the environment over its entire life cycle. So if you say you've got 2 products, one of them will have it because they have reduced their environmental impact, like they've actually tried to do that. Now you might think if it's voluntary, then why do companies do it? Well, particularly nowadays, so we're in 2021 and beyond, consumers are a lot more conscious of it, and actually it does a lot for companies' public image, and actually consumers will go towards companies that have got that better public image than ones that don't. Next, you've got the packaging directive. So this is the EU packaging directive. So it was amended in 2004. It's probably due to be amended somewhat soon, actually. So this sets targets for reducing the amount of packaging waste that's actually used. So that might be in terms of the actual initial packaging that comes in, things like Amazon coming in, like they use bits of packaging, the recycling of it or the reusing of the amount of it, and then the limit of the amount of toxic material that you can use. Now, toxic material is going to come up in another directive on the next slide as well. And then the last one on this one is the energy labeling directive. So you've probably seen this sticker in your house quite a lot, and you might be able to pinpoint what it is. Basically, any white goods, so that means anything electrical, anything like your fridges, your freezers, your dishwashers, your washing machines, your kettles, your microwave, all of these have to be on there by law to show that it how energy efficient something is. So to give you an example of like energy efficiency, if something is on, say like a light bulb or something like that, all of that energy should be going to just emitting light. If you touch the light bulb and it's hot, that means that's wasted energy because it's using more energy to turn the light bulb on, and some of that energy is being wasted through producing heat. So that will be a poor energy efficiency. Okay, and like you see a lot, it's not so popular now, but a few years ago, like steampunk was very much a thing, and you had those light bulbs and everything kind of looked mechanical. Those light bulbs were horrendous for efficiency. You're allowed to sell things that are inefficient. It's not a law to not to sell those things, but they have to be on there because it's about consumers being able to make their decision. And the reason why consumers would want something that is efficient is because it'll cost them less money to run. So if you've got a fridge that's an A and then you have a fridge that's a G, your energy bill will be a lot higher to have the G one plugged in because it's wasting a lot more energy, it's using a lot more energy, so your bill will be higher. So it doesn't stop you from making and selling things that are lower, but it encourages consumers to make the better choice, really. And things don't always stay the same energy efficiency. So just because it's an A doesn't mean 4 or 5 years down the road it will stay there. If it's heavily used, so over time, seals become weaker, parts become looser. So energy efficiency will degrade over time a little bit as well. So just be aware of that. So next you got the end of life vehicle directive. Now with these, you are allowed to know the abbreviations. You don't necessarily have to say the whole thing. So this is the whole idea of encouraging reusing waste from vehicles. So again, we talk about disassembly, the idea that making cars so that parts can be taken apart easily to be reused for something else. It might also reduce the use of toxic material in new cars, and then also requires plastic parts to be clearly labelled, so having the actual plastic symbol embossed into the actual plastic parts themselves, so it's easy to know what it is and how it can be recycled. Next, you got the Waste Electrical and Electronic Equipment Directive, so the WE Directive. So this is obviously specific for electronic products. So you will have seen that logo before, so the bin with a cross through it. So it encourages electronics that can be dismantled and reused and recycled. Again, the whole disassembly part. Um, it also forces manufacturers to inform their products can't just be chucked away. Hence why it's the bin with the cross through it. So if anyone's ever gone to like the tip, like your local tip before, when you go like general waste, you can't throw your electronics in there. That's why typically when you drive around to leave, you normally find all the like TVs, fridges, microwaves, CD players, all these sorts of things are normally in a separate pile because they need to be taken apart because all the electronic stuff needs to be taken out of it. You can't just chuck it away. And then the last one, you've got Restriction of Hazardous Substances Directive, so ROHS. So this ban, so there are 10 materials that are banned or limited in how much they're allowed to be used because they are poisonous or hazardous. Okay. Now, I don't know all 10. The main ones that you know are things like lead, mercury, cadmium, and chromium, because they are hazardous to human health. So if they're going to use them, they have to use them in a very, very limited amount. And if they do use them, they then must make sure that they can be disposed of and recycled safely and not, again, just chucked in a dump somewhere. So we talked about labelling a little bit. Now we won't spend a huge amount of time on this because obviously there is some overlap with when we did the materials theory video as well already. But we've seen the plastic recycling code, the polymer recycling codes already. So 1 to 7, 1 being nice and easy to recycle, 7 being it's not going to be recycled because it's very difficult to. So normally you always see the Mobius loop in there and then the numbers that go through it. Just be aware as well, please make sure you call it a Mobius loop, not recycling logo. It is the proper technical name and this is A level, so you should make sure you use the words Mobius loop. Then the other ones, you'll have seen these before, they're quite self-explanatory. So the glass one, again, so you can make sure you can recycle glass. If you've ever been to Tesco, Sainsbury's, they've always got the recycling bins for particular materials. Aluminium, and then steel. Now, obviously, the reason why steel's got a magnet in it is because steel is magnetic. So those are sort of the recycling labels that you should have molded into your material so it's nice and easy to identify what it is. So next we're going to talk about carbon footprint. Now this is where if you've done GCSE or A-level geography, I'm sure you've probably heard this term before. So carbon footprint and product miles sort of go hand in hand a little bit. So it's basically to do with over a product's life. Now this is where we have like the term cradle to grave, so from raw materials to the disposal of it at the end. How much energy has that product used? What is the overall effect on that? Now obviously things that are sourced and used locally have a much smaller carbon footprint, much less product miles than something that has to be imported from further away. So in terms of like product miles, so you've got extraction of raw materials from the ground, so that takes a huge amount of energy. Then they need to be transported to a factory to be refined and turned into an actual physical material. which takes a huge amount of energy. Then those materials are then sent off to a manufacturing company that actually turn it into a physical product. Then once it's a natural physical product, again taking more energy, it's then transported to shops around the world, around locally, depending on what kind of thing it is. Then they are then you travel to the shops to buy this thing, and then you use it for a month, 2 weeks, a year, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is, and then it recycled over that whole time. That's all the energy and that's all the CO2, that's everything that has been used in that product. Okay. Now, obviously, depending on where you live, depends on what kind of things you can get. Now, in the UK, obviously, there are certain things because of our climate, like fruits are a big one that we have to import because we just don't have the climate for it. So things like bananas, strawberries, oranges, all these sorts of things, we just don't have the climate for it. So we have to import it. So they have a higher product miles and a bigger carbon footprint than other things. So packaging. Now, packaging is a funny one because obviously packaging is one of the things that well, for the most part, you need. Packaging really serves two purposes. One is that it contains the product. So when you buy your phone, it comes with the phone, it comes with the charger, it comes with the headphones, unless you've got an Apple, it comes with your instructions. So it comes with all the parts contained in that box. Okay, so things like you need to have the packaging for like Coca-Cola because you can't just go up to Tesco's, put your hands in a cup and go, oh, can I just have or a pocket full of Diet Coke, please? So you need the can, you need the bottle for it to come in. So packaging that in that case is absolutely serving a purpose. Um, it also helps promote the product, which is why you have like the graphics, the logo, all those sorts of things. So they serve purposes. And then with food, it will obviously keep things fresh. But that's why sometimes when you buy food and you open it up, it says, right, once you've opened it, eat it within 3 days or you're going to get food poisoning. So it absolutely does serve a purpose, but there is some legislation in that's trying to reduce the amount of packaging used. Now we've discussed things like the packaging directive, which is a thing. That's making sure you're not using any excessive packagings. So just making sure, okay, you got to have packaging. So be realistic. How much do you really need? Okay, and using that amount. You also have things like the 5p tax on plastic bags. Now you may not necessarily remember a time before that because it was a few years ago now, but I'm sure all of us have got or had in our house like a drawer or a cupboard filled with plastic bags from Tesco, Sainsbury's, or wherever. Um, they actually started to tax those 5p bags because one to discourage us from using them and introducing the whole bag for life scheme because they, for the most part, plastic bags they would sit on a landfill and they don't degrade. They'll be there for thousands and thousands of years. Some countries, like Bangladesh and India and some others, have completely banned the use of thin plastic bags because they were actually going into rivers and lakes and blocking things up and causing quite a lot of contamination. So they just outright said, no, that's it, we're done, not having it. Now, there is some packaging that actually you would argue is just not necessary. So, particularly some fruits and vegetables. So, things like bananas, okay, they've got a protective skin around them anyway. Do they really need to be in a plastic bag? Same with oranges. Okay, they've got a skin on it. Do they need to be in like a little net bag? Same with apples. Apples come with a plastic tray and then plastic film around it. That's two lots of packaging for apples. Do they actually really need to have that? You also find things like pineapples that come in pack. Like really, packaging like pineapples got to be like the most protected fruit in terms of its outer shell there is. So why do you need to like wrap it in something? And then just at the bottom, you have got a little bit of an example. So Marks and Spencers actually, as a company, um, have done quite a lot to reduce their overall packaging usage. And a really good example that just kind of boils it down to simply put, things like frozen pizzas. Okay, everyone eats pizza. Okay, and typically they would normally come in like a full cardboard box, like the one on the left. But actually, if you still you still got to have the plastic film around it because it's keeping it fresh. But then for the sleeve, like instead of having a whole box, just having a card sleeve, and that is a huge reduction in the amount of packaging actually used. And if you've made, say, 100 pizzas, okay, if you add up how much less packaging you've used just by having a sleeve instead of a whole box, that is going to make a huge difference the more and more that you make. So that kind of just shows you little ways that companies in the UK and around the world can do to reduce their impact. So you've also got, these are a few more general things that we've got. So we said already that reducing the size of packaging, keeping it to a minimum. Packaging should be used using rectangular shapes to make transportation more efficient. So there's a reason why you don't get packaging that's like all triangle shapes and all like weird shapes like that. Packaging needs to be stackable, because it means that it's a lot easier to transport. So say you've got a lorry full of products with a car with rectangles or squares. It's nice and easy to stack them up. If it's all really weird shapes, you can't stack as many up, so you'd end up having to take 2 or 3 lorries loads to do it that way instead. That's also why fizzy drinks cans have got the lips on the top and the bottom, so they're stackable, so you can stack loads of them. Um, so it's much easier, more efficient to transport. You've also got now things like the LDPE cushion, like the cushions of air that you get to stop things from rattling around. Um, that's replacing like the polystyrene peanuts because styrofoam, not polystyrene. Styrofoam is really bad for the environment because basically it can't be recycled. And then you've got things like just making sure you're using recycled material like cardboard. Now that is where Amazon is good. Amazon packaging is really easy to recycle. There's nothing extra on it. There's no glossy finish to it. It can literally just be recycled straight away. And then avoiding things like oil-based plastics. That's also why we think like 3D printing, things like PLA are becoming a very popular material because it's starch-based. So there's no actual, doesn't derive from oil at all. Next, we've got the circular economy. So this is specific to A level, and it's a relatively new concept to make into the exams. So typically, most companies use like a linear economy, which basically means uh, take resources, make it into something, and then dispose of it when you're done with it. Okay, and that's the bit that people have got a problem with. It's I'm taking brand new, fresh resources, doing something with it, and then once I'm done, I just dispose of it. I don't care. I just chuck it, whatever. Don't care. Okay, a circular economy is trying to turn that rather than being a linear like a straight line, having a continuous cycle of reusing things. Okay, so things like reusing containers, fixing things, remanufacturing things, trying to reduce the amount of waste that you've got. So things like when we said Waitrose and they say bring your own containers to fill up on like cereal and coffees and nuts and things like that. Now, obviously, you're always going to have a little bit of waste. You can never not have zero waste, but the aim is to reduce that as much as physically possible. There are a few other ways you can do it apart from like the taking containers in and those sorts of things. Companies can like lease products, so schools, colleges, companies, they can like hire their IT equipment rather than buying it outright and then when they have to replace them, they just chuck the old ones and buy new ones. You can lease the IT equipment on like a 3 4 year cycle or whatever it may be, and then once they sort of like become a little bit obsolete, send them back, and then they'll be taken apart and recycled, and then you get a new set. Same with like construction, you can like rather than buying manufacturing equipment, tools, or whatever it may be, rent them and then return them, and then you can keep going that way. It's a lot better. You then got things like the take back method, which Dyson uses quite a lot, and I'll show you a little in, quote from their website that talks about this. But basically, they say, right, when you're done with it, whether it's broken or it's not, send it to us, or we'll send someone to come and collect it, and we will break it apart and reuse as much of it as possible. So the whole aim of this basically is to reduce or limit the amount of finite resources we're using, reduce as much waste as possible, avoid pollution, try and make it more like competitive. So we're trying to become more efficient. Now there are some economies that are really good at this. Things like places like Sweden are amazing at it. Just basically trying to stop this whole throwaway culture of use something, I'm done with it, chuck it, whatever, don't care. So yeah, this is taken from the Dyson website. So this is about the fact that they say once you're done with it, that's not just the end of it. We will then make sure we dispose of it properly. We will, so they mention things like the We Directive. So they make sure that things are disposed of in an environmentally friendly way. They also make sure that things are taken apart and parts that can be reused again are reused again. So this is actually on the Dyson website. They're promoting, showing what they actually are doing. And then this is just another diagram to explain the whole idea of circular economy as well. So there's two last little bits actually. So first bit is like saving materials and using newer energy. So the simple put way for this is how many of you in secondary school or in college, you need to laser cut something, you need to mill something, whether it may be. You get a nice new sheet of acrylic or MDF or ply, whatever it is. nothing on it before, and then you cut something out directly in the middle of it. Okay, that's a huge amount of waste. Now, excuse me, the reason why you don't care really is probably because you're not paying for it for the most part. Now, obviously, um, in the second year of A level, you supply your own materials anyway, so you probably care a bit more. But because companies are paying and they want to make sure they're not wasting material, um, it's called nesting. So if you can see the diagram on the right hand side, is all of those drawings, like files, could easily have just filled up that whole page. Quite easy. I've seen students do that all the time. But just by arranging it and making things as close as possible, you've actually got a fully other usable piece of material left. Okay, so just be aware that term is called nesting, and it's about just making sure you're not wasting any excess material when you don't need to. So then we'll look at different types of energy. So obviously we talked about finite resources: oil, coal, gas. So the most common renewable energy sources we've got, so wind from wind farms, hydro, which is dams that are built to trap water and then they turn turbines. Solar from solar panels. Now there's quite a few people are getting solar panels on their houses now. You got wave power, which is kinetic energy um, to power the power turbines. Tidal, which they've built barges that are built across estuaries that again kinetic energy that are moving turbines. You've got geothermal, which is natural heat from the earth and the earth's core. And you've got biomass, which is organic matter, things like wood, dried vegetation. So you burn that to heat water up, and that water creates steam. And again, that steam will turn turbines. So the advantages of renewable energy, so obviously it's sustainable, so we're not going to run out of wind or sun or anything like that. Less maintenance is required compared to traditional generators because it's not as dirty. There is reduced operational costs once it's set up. There's little to no waste. And it does have social and economic benefits. So basically, like we talked about before, you've got a better public image if you're seen as being a company that uses this energy compared to someone that doesn't. So more people are more likely to engage with your company. And the main disadvantages are that it's still quite difficult to create large amounts of energy. It really is. It's weather reliant. Now, obviously, being in the UK, that means that solar for several months of the year is not really that good. Wind will be good, but yeah. So depending on where you live, depends on it's very much dependent on the weather. Most can't be stored for later use. Now, typically, when you create energy, you then store it in batteries. There's not really many ways of storing renewable energy yet. But that is one of the things that people are looking into. And it is more expensive than fossil fuels or nuclear energy, particularly in the setup. So if anyone's got solar panels on your roof, you don't actually own them. You sort of like you pay to have them on there, and then you rent them for like X amount of time. But to do that costs quite a bit up front. But then over time, obviously, you end up saving money because you're not paying energy bills. Okay, and now the last little bit. So a few different like design approaches that companies can take. There's sort of like three levels to it. So you got green design, which is sort of like the entry level one. So it's basically focused on a couple of areas of the product's life cycle. So they may make modifications like conserving materials or recycling materials or using different manufacturing processes that use less energy. So rather than looking at the whole product life cycle and trying to completely change it to make it less of an impact, they'll just focus on a couple of little bits. Got eco design. So this goes further than the green design. It's like level two. So basically, they'll collaborate to try and reduce the impact throughout the entire lifespan. So that's from extraction of raw materials all the way through to disposal of at the end of the life of the product. So they're trying to look at tackling concerns like material consumption, so not excessive material, fossil fuel consumption, so trying to reduce that, and then pollution or toxic waste. And then you've got sustainable design. So this basically is the people that are trying to do the most. So sustainable approach to designing a product. So they'll think about the entire big picture, not just in the manufacture of it. They may also look at things like socio-economic issues. So making sure fair trade schemes, making sure companies workers are paid a fair price, making sure you're not using things like sweatshops and things like that. So making sure not just in the manufacture of an actual physical product, but the whole process and everyone that's involved in it is all being treated fairly. Okay, so 5 questions for you to have a look through. So pause the video answer those 5 questions, then unpause it, and we'll go for the answers. Okay, so what are 3 types of recycling? So you got primary, secondary, and tertiary. So primary is functioning products that can still be used. Secondary, so material being reused for another purpose, and tertiary is it being chemically broken down to reuse for something else. So name a product and explain how it can be redesigned using the 6Rs to reduce the environmental impact. So that would be like the TV remote and using things like thinner plastic walls, making sure it's smaller, making sure it can be disassembled nice and easily. How can retailers reduce the packaging that they're selling? Give real life examples to back your answer up. So this is the key thing to remember as well. It'll be with real life examples at A level. So things like not packaging fruit, so bananas, oranges, apples, making sure you've not excess packaging that you need, refillable coffee jars, anything like that. Name 3 different renewable energy sources: any wind, hydro, solar, tidal, biomass, geothermal. And then what is circular economy and why is it important? So circular economy is about trying to basically reduce that whole use something and then discard it, making sure things are being recycled, remanufactured, reused, trying to reduce the amount of waste that you're doing and trying to avoid pollution as much as possible. So that is the end of the updated version of sustainable and environmental issues. If you've got any questions, please let me know.